I'm Veronica Marshall at the Capitol. This week on Senate Spotlight, when companies break the law with unfair, deceptive, and fraudulent practices, the state steps in. And now some senators hope it'll step up even more.
It's great when people see consumers have been protected.
Restitution can be made to individual victims.
How some of the fines racked up by fraud could end up in your pocket. Plus, the push to protect more Minnesotans from a rare but deadly disorder.
Put this on the newborn screening so no family ever has to hear, go home and make memories with your child.
That's coming up.
Senate Spotlight is produced by the Minnesota Senate and Senate Media Services.
From ticket transparency to click-to-cancel rights and a junk fee ban. Thanks to last year's legislations, Minnesota's consumers have more protections this year. Now there's a new effort to add at least one more law to the list. I'm now joined by a senator who has signed on to the bill, showing his support for the creation of a consumer protection restitution account. Republican Senator Mark Koran. Senator, thank you for being here.
It's my pleasure.
Senator, you're not part of the Commerce and Consumer Protection Committee, but you have long advocated for stronger cybersecurity protections for Minnesotans. How do those two areas intersect?
So I spent my first 4 years on on commerce, so consumer protection and get off of it. But it hasn't changed my interest in especially around technology and how does it impact people. And today, it's one of the primary methods that people are being used to be swindled and or influenced in so many ways. So I haven't changed that. So I signed on to this bill because I think it's great when people see consumers have been protected. We get a variety of sources where in vehicles that we use to make sure that they're taken care of or protected from a financial perspective, from access and information, from your home and your personal and your work use. All of those things come into play. But when these stories hit the headlines, today most don't understand that any of those financial rewards actually go to the state general fund. Say the Attorney General finds somebody and they should take the appropriate action, and they go into general fund. I signed on to this bill because its entire intent is to make sure that anything that's collected, how do we get it to the people who are actually harmed, which are the citizens of Minnesota?
Now, this bill would add on to the protections we currently have in place. Why don't you take me through some of those and the success we've seen from them?
Well, there's a whole variety. I don't know if I can take it from the whole host of issues, but they're many and varied, right? Because from youth gaming, right? I think Juul, I think there's some tobacco issues. There's a whole host of things that people either know or they don't know in going after consumer protections where they've been taken unfair advantage either through some technology, a product, advertising, or otherwise. Some of those don't lead to financial rewards, but those that do should actually go to the people who are harmed. And so that to me is why I signed on. But I do have some concerns on how we do manage that in the future to make sure we understand how do we get it back to the people and make sure that most of it goes back.
Well, so talking about the bill that's before the Senate now, Senate File 447, do you think that it will just sail through, or will the legislation encounter any issues?
I think it might. I think the intent is great. That's why I signed on to it. But I do have concerns. The Attorney General's office would manage those things. Today, I'm concerned about the lack of transparency in that office. For us to understand, I believe our intent is to make sure that we absorb the costs, right, to prosecute and make sure we correct the harm. But we don't have any transparency today to make sure that how those costs are determined and then to make sure that the dollars actually get back to the citizens or the victim in this particular case. So there's a variety of, those are the concerns I have about all legislation. It can have the greatest intent, but implementation matters, and what we want is a transparency across all government. And today the Attorney General's office leaves us some pause because they have broken kind of a 40-plus year standard of cases that they're involved in, investigations, when they get to a certain point, that we have access to that information so we can understand and know government played the appropriate role, acted within the guidelines and the expectations, but the transparency is what builds trust to all of our citizens and certainly the legislature when we go to fund or grant somebody additional capabilities to be able to pursue and or in this case through an enforcement action, deliver those funds to the actual citizens who are harmed.
So would you think it's fair to say that your stance on 447 is it's a great start that we can build upon?
Yep, I love the concept. How do we build around the guardrails and guidelines to make sure that we have the transparency to ensure all agency, any agency, certainly the Attorney General's office, operates in the manner in which we intended. And so today, he doesn't allow the transparency. He has received the court ruling that allows him to determine, and it kind of broke a 40-year standard to build trust in that agency for anything we ask them to do. This would be just a new capability. I like the idea again. No general fund dollars, let's get them to the people. But we also have to have the transparency as legislators and citizens to know that it was operated and run the way it should be.
You talked about trust in our state systems. There's a federal system that also looks out for consumer protections, but it's been in the headlines recently. There's been some work stoppage there. How will that impact us here in Minnesota?
So we already have a wide variety of services in Minnesota for which it doesn't impact us there. And at the federal level, prior to the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, we had 5 other agencies who had the consumer finance protection responsibilities. And so I see it as a reconfiguring. Those consumer protections don't go away. They'll likely be reassigned to another existing agency. Remember, there are 5 separate agencies that manage our large financial institutions prior to the creation of the the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. And so I think it's much like Minnesota. Governor Walz is reconfiguring some of the criminal investigation in the commerce or consumer finance or consumer protections, moving them into the BCA today. So it's really no different than what we're doing here, taking a different look at it, reconfiguring the operations, moving from 5, we had 5 agencies previously, now there was 6. Maybe we'll just go back to 5, or maybe we'll go back to 3 that will allow us to continue to provide the consumer protection that's needed.
Senator, we've talked about what the state can do. We've talked about the federal agencies. What can consumers themselves do?
And today it's a challenging world. So when you look at the threats, and it's always kind of deemed, we're dealing with this from a financial perspective, but it really is about access to information, the control your home computer to the supercomputer you keep in your pocket, and then access. How are you being solicited today with phishing scams, ransomware scam, all of those things, DNS, denial of service, all of those things are in place today that provide and are financially harmful. You add AI into the world, and those demands or those threats are growing exponentially. And so that's where for me, I'm involved I'm in the cybersecurity task force. I've been involved in all the technology. I'm a process guy, not a technology guy. But what do we do when AI, how is it applied here? And I have, my personal political bias is that I haven't met an AI that isn't biased yet. And so then the bias is one thing, so what information do you see when? But the assault and threat on our younger children and our elder population is significant. In our younger population, I meet with the Googles and those that come through, and they actually have a belief that they are required to provide access to the internet for a 13-year-old with or without parental consent. And so for me, I would have a huge issue with that. I tell them they're wrong, but that belief is pervasive in some lawsuits they've been able to facilitate. Then you have on the senior citizen side, you think about the elderly, and I'm 61 soon, the grandma scam, ransom scams. Grandma's receives a call from their grandson who's in the Caribbean islands on vacation. With AI, they'll be able to emulate the actual physical presence of their grandchild and the voice to try and convince them to commit a financial crime or theft through swindle and to go grab $20,000 in gift cards at Target. And so those threats are coming, they're varied, and they're coming more quickly than ever. So it's about, on your phones, are you cybersecurity, or do you have security baked in? Do your updates, your home computers, all of those things are pervasive, but it's always going to come down to what about the education of the user? Whether they're a child, somebody's my age, my grandchildren, my kids, or somebody's much older than me, technology is in almost every facet of their life, whether they want it or not. And today, that's what we worry about, and that's what we focus on all the time. And then we get to the other side. How do we protect us serving in a legislative role? How do we protect our assets and critical services and the threats that are continuous and nonstop to make sure vital services are uninterrupted to all of our citizens, from consumer finance and protection to your roads to energy and to our wastewater or our water infrastructure.
Senator, are there any final thoughts on this topic you'd like to share?
No, I think I covered to me, I think the greatest growing threat is the threat on our children, the youngest generation, who kind of know no bounds, and information is forever. And I'm not sure they understand that, know it. It will be life-changing, always wonderful when it works well and used for great intent. Our job is to try and protect them from themselves and do everything we can to provide consumer protection at the state level where it's appropriate. And going back to our bill, when we do have great harm, and let's make sure it gets to the consumers who are actually harmed.
Senator, thank you for your time.
Awesome. Thank you. It was my pleasure.
I'm really proud of the work we've done in the state of Minnesota in the last 2 years to empower Minnesotans to establish a safer, fairer marketplace to empower people to make informed decisions about how and where to spend their hard-earned money and to protect themselves from scams and fraudsters. We passed the Minnesota Debt Fairness Act, we regulated payday lending, we enhanced student loan borrower protections, and much more, but we can't do that alone.
Senator Matt Klein, chair of the Senate's Commerce and Consumer Protection Committee, and other DFL members shared their concern over the recent work stoppage at the Federal Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, or CFPB. The group says the loss of the federal support puts Minnesotans and their money at risk when it comes to large banks, credit card companies, and others.
Without this agency, we're going to have fewer resources to monitor and hold servicers accountable for improper practices, such as mismanagement of loans or illegal debt collection methods.
From spotting scammers that target seniors to defending renters' rights and investigating complaints about predatory pricing, it's hard to think of someone who hasn't or couldn't benefit from consumer protections. Now, there's a new push to get Minnesotans who've been hurt by financial fraudsters justice and put some money back in their pockets. I'm now joined by DFL Senator Ann Rest, who has a new bill out to do just that. Senator, welcome to Senate Spotlight.
Thank you very much.
All right, Senator, when we talk about consumer protections, that can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. What do we mean when it comes to consumer protections in Minnesota?
Well, we're looking fairly narrowly in this bill at fraud that is perpetrated on consumers. That can come over the internet, it can come in the mail, it can come at your front door, as a matter of fact, or through a text. People that are offering Minnesota consumers and taxpayers a deal that's too good to be true, that proposes that they will gain some sort of financial reward for sending in their Social Security number or their bank number, and we are finding that it happens. The particular set of victims in Minnesota has been primarily older Minnesotans. And just like the gangster who, when asked, why do you rob banks? Well, why are the biggest number of people who are victims of these financial crimes, why are they older Minnesotans? Why are they retired Minnesotans? And the fact of the matter is, that's where the money is. That's who have saved. Many are in retirement, as opposed to younger people who are not any less or more gullible. But what they don't have, many of them do not have, is a lot of money that is part of their discretionary income, or that comes in on a regular basis, that is part of savings or retirement or the value on their home. And so these particular victims have become a special concern. of the AARP, and that organization is the one that brought me the idea for the bill, and they and I worked with the Attorney General's office to develop the language and then to introduce it. And as you mentioned, it's going to get a hearing in the Senate Commerce Committee this week. So I'm very pleased on their behalf. And the complaints that come up are that after someone has been robbed of this money, that there's no recourse for any kind of restitution. So what the bill proposes is to set up a special revenue account that sets aside some of the money from fines, for example, that when people are convicted of this kind of fraud, that from the special revenue account, restitution can be made to individual victims, as well as returning 50% of those fines, et cetera, to the general fund.
Now, this is, first of all, I love that you said that these victims are older adults because they have that cash flow. I had never thought about that, so I appreciate you bringing that up. Sure. How big of a problem is this type of consumer fraud in Minnesota? Well,
from the information that we got from the AARP, it is a considerable amount of money. 103, according to them, $103 million were lost in just the first 3 quarters of 2024. And Minnesotans reported over 22,000 fraud cases to the Federal Trade Commission, because that's the federal organization that has jurisdiction over it, and that over half of Americans across the country are concerned about being targeted. So if you get a strange email or a text, whether it's from a long-lost nephew who needs $5,000 to get out of jail in some far-off country, and if you just send it to him, that kind of thing, or if you a get-rich-quick scheme, if you just send identifying information, and as soon as you do that, your accounts are compromised and money is withdrawn without either your knowledge, sometimes, and certainly without your consent. And those crimes are prosecuted. Right now, if they can't actually find the person to start with, to give them part of the fines that are collected, sometimes the criminals no longer have the money or wherewithal to do that, but sometimes there is. And so that money goes into a special revenue account, and it can be used to provide restitution to the victims, either in whole or in part.
I was going to ask, what systems we currently have in place to protect consumers, and right now we do prosecute these types of criminals. I was going to ask, what happens to that money in the current system?
Well, if it is not able to be, and there are lots of reasons that are, it's impractical. The person, the victim, can't be found, but the criminal is still being fined. Okay, and so currently, those fines, as they are collected, go 100% into the general fund, and some cases that are brought, the victim is right there and can receive the money, the fine themselves, the money from the fine, according to how the court judges it. But often the victims are just left with nothing. And what this fund will do is take half of the dollars that otherwise cannot be distributed to an individual, put them in a special revenue account, or the money that goes into the special revenue account, and then 50% of those funds, and we're strongly considering putting a cap on how much goes into that fund, but and it's on an annual basis. If they don't catch any criminals and prosecute them and convict them in any given year, then no money would go into that account or even back to the general fund. So it is an attempt to, where we can, to provide some sort of restitution on those losses.
Senator, you mentioned, the Federal Consumer Protection Agency, and there's been a lot of discussion.
Well, it's the Federal Trades Commission that actually, the FTC, that has consumer protection powers within it.
Okay. There's been a lot of discussion at the federal level about what's going on with consumer protections, and it has Minnesotans concerned. As a Minnesota legislator, what can you do to help ease those concerns? Do you think this bill is a step along that way?
Well, I certainly do, and what we can do is almost the number one responsibility of any legislator, and that is listen to your constituents. And I found out about this issue and about this idea for a bill from a constituent who attended a listening session that I hold many of in New Hope. And I was very intrigued by the possibility, and then reached out to AARP and together produced this bill of setting up a special revenue fund to protect to the degree possible and restore some of their financial security.
Senator, that's a great story of how one constituent can have such a big impact. That one person planted an idea.
Just show up at a listening session or a town meeting and make your case, and I think most legislators will pay attention.
Senator, is there anything else you'd like to say on this topic?
No, I so appreciate however, that it is getting attention that it needs, because I think from the numbers I gave you, you can see it's a growing problem, and it's a huge problem. And we shouldn't have 22,000 Minnesotans become the victims of this kind of financial crime. And this doesn't stop the crime, this bill, but it does recognize the legitimate needs of the people who have been victimized.
And we know that goes beyond just the individual, too. It's their families that are impacted, or even the economy. Indeed. When they don't have that money to spend.
Right.
All right. Senator, thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, well, it was a pleasure. Thank you for your interest.
Absolutely. Experts from the state's Department of Commerce testified in front of the Senate's Commerce and Consumer Protection Committee. They said their enforcement division investigated more than 1,000 complaints against credit services, lending, money transmitters, and others last year. The department also opened a similar number of cases specifically relating to fraud against seniors, and the team investigated just under 700 cases regarding real estate complaints. If you have a complaint or concern, you can start the process of filing it with the Department of Commerce online via their website by emailing them at consumer.protection@state.mn.us or by giving them a call at 651-539-1600 or 800-657-3602. When it comes to diagnosing metachromatic leukodystrophy, or MLD, if you wait for symptoms to develop, you've waited too long. While there is no cure for MLD, early detection through newborn screenings gives the disorder's youngest patients their best chances at having healthy lives. Now, there's a new bill to add MLD to the Minnesota newborn screening list.
Gavin was a handsome, healthy baby with a super chill personality. As Gavin grew, he met his milestones, but was always a little slower. We took him to the doctor to check this out. They told us he would be fine. It would just take time.
But even with time, Gavin still struggled to catch up to his peers. And so the Quimby family found themselves in the doctor's office once again.
The neurologist told us that he believed Gavin had a rare, incurable, life-ending disease called metachromatic leukodystrophy. He was told us there was nothing he could do for Gavin, there was no treatments, and that we should take him home.
While metachromatic leukodystrophy, or MLD, is rare, the Quimby story is unfortunately familiar for families whose littlest loved ones have been diagnosed with the disorder.
They said, go home and make memories, right? No one ever wants to hear that, go home and make memories, because there is no hope for your child.
We tried to shift our parental paradigm to whatever her future might look like. My God, Chloe might not be able to dance at her own prom. I just want her to be able to walk with a walker. Okay, I just want her to be able to walk at all. Okay, the disease is going to cause intellectual impairment. I just want her to graduate from high school. I just want her to be able to talk a little, maybe express her basic wants and needs. I just want my baby to live. I just want my baby to die without too much pain.
Now, scientific progress has made it possible that other Minnesotan families don't have to feel the pain of losing a child to MLD.
With the ascendancy of gene therapy and genetic testing, things that were out of reach of medicine even a decade ago when we lost our daughter are now within the reach of medicine, and right here in the state of Minnesota, we're doing some amazing things.
And Senator Jeremy Miller is hoping to do an amazing thing too.
Today we are talking about a bipartisan effort to add metachromatic leukodystrophy, often referred to as MLD, to the newborn screening list here in Minnesota.
His bill, Senate File 1494, would give families more time for treatment and time together.
Now the testing is there, as well as the treatments are available.
When MLD begins to rob a child of the skills that they rightfully developed, there's no recovering what's been lost. There's no catching back up, and there's no going back to normal. Children who are treated before MLD begins chipping away at their skills, they do not lose abilities.
Gavin started showing signs of MLD at the age of 1 and progressively got worse and worse. If we had known at birth that he was sick, he would have a better chance today of getting earlier treatment. These children were detected early with the screen and are now healthy, thriving with their lives, a life that we had wished that we had had for Gavin.
Senator Miller's bill to add MLD to the state's newborn screenings list was introduced mid-February and has been referred to the Health and Human Services Committee for further discussion. The bipartisan bill has a companion bill in the House, House File 1029, which has bipartisan support there as well. That's all the time we have today. Thank you for joining us, and see you next time.